When I first started dating Ethan, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. He was thoughtful without being clingy, successful without being arrogant, and the kind of man who always kept his word. If he said he'd be there at 7, he was pulling into my driveway at 6:58. If he promised to fix something, it got fixed that day. After years of dating men who thought plans were more like vague suggestions, Ethan was a breath of fresh air. But as months turned into years, that dependability, his predictability, started to feel a little too secure. And if I'm being completely honest, I started to take him for granted. I never doubted for a second that he would be there for me no matter what I did, and that certainty gave me this dangerous sense of control over him. I thought I could push, test, and even hurt him a little. Because he'd always come back. That's when I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. I'd teach him a lesson. I'd make him a little jealous, keep him on his toes, remind him that I had options. My logic at the time was that it would make him appreciate me more. Looking back now, it sounds ridiculous. Borderline cruel. But in the moment, I convinced myself it was harmless. The opportunity presented itself one night when we were invited to a friend's birthday party. It was being held at a rooftop bar downtown, the kind with dim lighting, a live DJ, and overpriced cocktails. Ethan looked incredible in a navy blazer, but I barely told him so before we walked in. My plan was already forming. Inside, I spotted an old acquaintance. Lucas. Someone I'd gone on a couple of dates with years before meeting Ethan. He was tall, charming, and knew exactly how to work a crowd. Perfect, I thought. The lesson was going to be easy. I made sure to greet Lucas a little too warmly, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm when I spoke. I even made a point of leaning in close when the music got loud, my hand brushing against his. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept glancing at Ethan, waiting for the telltale signs. Tightened jaw, narrowed eyes, maybe a protective arm around my waist to reclaim me. But Ethan didn't react. He chatted with friends, sipped his drink, smiled occasionally in my direction, but otherwise seemed completely unbothered. It was like he didn't even notice. That annoyed me. Wasn't the point for him to realize I was desirable, that he could lose me? I decided to push further. I spent nearly the entire evening with Lucas, only drifting back to Ethan when it was time to leave. On the ride home, I waited for him to say something. Anything. But instead he just asked, "Did you have fun tonight?" His tone was calm, casual, like nothing was wrong. I muttered, "Yeah," and looked out the window, irritated that my little game hadn't worked. The next morning, Ethan was up early, making coffee like always. But instead of 2 mugs on the counter, there was just one. "Where's mine?" I asked, half joking. He looked at me and said, "Oh, I figured you'd want to get your coffee with Lucas next time." The words hit me like a slap. Before I could respond, he added, "By the way, I think we should take a break." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged like the decision was already made. "Because I'm not interested in being someone's backup plan or someone's safety net. If you think you can do better, I'm not going to stand in your way." I scrambled to explain, to tell him it was just a joke, just me trying to make things exciting again. But Ethan wasn't buying it. "Exciting for you," he said evenly. "Humiliating for me. And I don't stick around for people who think disrespect is a form of fun." That night, he packed an overnight bag and left. I thought he'd cool off and come back in a few days. He didn't. A week went by, then 2. I texted, called, even showed up at his office once, but he never responded. That's when I heard from a mutual friend that Ethan had been seen out with someone new. A woman named Claire, who, from what I could tell on social media, was stunning and classy in that effortless way I'd always envied. Photos of them together started popping up. At art galleries, at wine tastings, on weekend trips. She looked at him the way I used to, before I started taking him for granted. And he looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. At first, I told myself it was just a rebound, that he'd come to his senses. But the months passed, and they only seemed happier. Meanwhile, my own dating life was a mess. Short-lived flings, ghosted text threads, men who couldn't hold a candle to Ethan's consistency or kindness. Every time I went on a bad date, I thought about that night at the rooftop bar and how smug I'd felt, thinking I was in control. The truth is, I thought Ethan's love was unconditional. I thought no matter what I did, he'd always choose me. What I didn't realize is that the very thing I admired most about him, his quiet strength, also meant he knew when to walk away without looking back. He didn't scream or try to win me over with grand gestures. He simply decided he deserved better and acted on it. And now, watching from a distance, I can see he was right. The last time I saw him was completely by chance, at a farmer's market on a Sunday morning. He was with Claire, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers she'd picked out. We made eye contact briefly, and he gave me a polite smile. The kind you give a stranger you recognize but don't really know anymore. That smile hurt more than anything he could have said. It was final. It was the end of a chapter one had destroyed with my own hands. I went home that day and sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, realizing the lesson I had actually taught. Not to Ethan, but to myself. That respect isn't optional in a relationship. That games have consequences. And that sometimes, the person you think will always be there for you walks away. And never comes back. I tried to teach him a lesson. Turns out, I was the one who learned.